All right, I will call the September meeting of the Delaware County Juvenile Detention Board of Managers meeting to order. We all rise for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, the first item, are these working? Okay. First item, as always, is any public comment. And as always, the public comment at the start of the meeting is reserved for items that are on the agenda. And the second public comment at the end of the meeting can be on anything related to juvenile detention. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak? Hearing none. The next item is an approval of last month's meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
Make a motion for.
I'll second.
Thank you, Chris and Elaine. Any questions, comments? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next item is a report on the current population in custody. And for that, we have Ms. DiMatteo.
No ledge here. It's a little dangerous. Danielle DiMatteo from Department of Juvenile Court and Probation Services. The current population is 9 juveniles. 2 are in Montgomery County, 3 in Bucks County, 3 in Aspire, and 1 is in Abraxas. However, it's a Lehigh County bed that we borrowed. They do not currently have any beds available to us. Apologize for the breathlessness, but I had talked to Carlton. I was not prepared for today's meeting. I'm limited on time, but I did pull some things together today in terms of a look back from March 13th to August 31st. We have committed 53 juveniles to detention for a total of 1,186 days of care. The per diems for those facilities have been discussed before, but they range from $305 to $479 on average. And the total cost thus far is $402,384.74, and that's through August 31st. Of those cases, we have, bear with me for 1 second, we had 15% of those youth. I know someone was interested in the first listing and how many were released. So 15% were released at the first listing. And I believe that those numbers include, it was 8 total juveniles, 7 went home, and 1 went directly to placement for inpatient drug and alcohol care.
Sorry, 15% of the 53?
Yes, went home at the first listing. All the rest stayed and then were released thereafter to various.
Can you just repeat the date range?
March 13th, which was the first day after the detention center is closing, through August 31st.
You were going to say, and after, apart from the 15%, until they were released?
The remainder were released either, obviously, home to another placement facility or transferred in secure care to other detention centers because they were county transfers.
Do you have a percentage for those that went home?
I do not. I apologize. Like I said, I was grabbing this as I was running out the door. I think the other thing that's important when we're talking about secure detention is that specifically this weekend, and at this point, Schumann Center in Erie County has since closed or is in the process of closing, which is adding an additional county or 2 that are in search of secure beds. So in addition, I understand that Dauphin County, who reached out to us to reserve beds, which we don't have, is also running into issues because the Abraxas staffing issues have presented with limited beds. So if they can't staff the unit, they're not offering those beds as available. So this weekend we were faced with the first time that I'm aware of where 2 juveniles went home after an armed robbery because there were no beds. Both of them were monitored closely during that time and are still, but it's the first time since the center's closing that we were faced with no options.
How did they monitor?
We put monitors on them. There was contact with them immediately on Monday. This was all unfolding on Sunday. They're still home. They're on monitors, and like I said, we're keeping in contact and keeping a close watch on them. But it was the first time that 2 juveniles who would have otherwise qualified for detention on a number of reasons: the offense, the severity of the offense, the circumstances, the weapon, but we had no options.
Given this circumstance, what's the process? Should a bed become available? Like, what happens? Do they go from monitoring to?
No, I think generally we would probably keep things status quo if we can. I think the one individual, there's some family concern in addition to what has been presented, again, pre-adjudicatory and at the time of the allegation, but I think the family also has raised concerns in one case about the severity of the offense and the ability to be able to supervise closely this young person. So, again, as I've come here every meeting and before that with any discussions, we've had at least a option. We've been able to find a bed. In this particular circumstance, it would have been our decision to detain, but we had no beds available.
Does that mean that the neighboring counties are at full capacity, or do they refused detention?
I believe in this case there were no beds at either. There was no beds available based on the current staffing at the time of our request.
So it was more of a staffing limitation than it was,
Right.
beds.
Yeah, and generally speaking, Montgomery County and Bucks County and Chester County, for the most part, have all said that, if we have them, you can have 2 of them. Abraxas has given us whatever's been available, if it's available, and then, of course, Aspire the same way. Whatever's available is available. There's a number of counties that are competing for the Abraxas beds. Again, with the closing of the Schumann Center, and Dauphin County, that's one of their primary sites.
Two questions. You mentioned from March to August you had 53 juveniles. Based on your experience, is that number a high number, a low number over the years that you've seen juveniles during that period of time, or?
No, I think our numbers presently in 2021 have been significantly lower than in past years. Now, over the last 10 years, and I believe I provided this to the board early on, the numbers have decreased year after year after year. So it's a number of efforts that have contributed to that. But again, I think with better utilization of alternatives, the lower numbers in terms of the general filings as a result of the pandemic or other circumstances, that those numbers are even lower at this present time, which is good.
When a family presents concerns, as you acknowledge, that there are any supports that are able to be offered?
Well, in this one particular case, we did utilize a grandparent for the immediate because the mother was not even in town. But the grandmother is also, older and has some uncertainty about the circumstances.
But is there any supports that are offered to the grandparent?
The monitor and whichever case management company that's in place. So we have a number of them, as I provided in an email, I think, to Carlton, where we have a number, I think we have 8 or 9 off the top of my head, of pre-adjudicatory monitoring of programs that offer a monitor as well. So they'll do the general case management and support, but they also have the availability of a GPS monitor along with that service or independent of that service. And I think we committed to Carlton that we would try to put together something more in terms of prevention, diversion, and then our pre-adjudicatory, because there's various degrees of both prevention and diversion for the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that was kind of just what we wanted to get at, was understanding that sort of range of options that you said currently exists that this board perhaps isn't aware of.
Okay.
So that would be appreciated. Anything else for Ms. DiMatteo?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item for today is a report from our subcommittees. Any updates from the Human Resources Committee?
Yes, so here's where we are on the search for a director. We thank you to everyone who sent out the brochure and the job listing and description and posting. We received a total of 6 applications. 3 of them made it through screening, and it is time to schedule those interviews. We had discussed at the committee level, and I think at the whole committee level, that we would invite the entire group to participate if you're interested. So it is up to us to pick 3 hour-long slots over the next week or so to conduct these 3 interviews. And we'll do it by Zoom so that more people can participate. And we will schedule it, give it to Stacy, and then she will reach out to the candidates. So following this meeting, I will send out a scheduling email, probably with a doodle poll, and I'll pick some times that the most people can come to. I apologize in advance. There aren't going to be 3 slots that everybody who wants to can come to, but I am going to ask you, fill out that doodle poll in the next day so that we can move forward. And if you haven't filled it out by the end of tomorrow, we're going to move on without you. And if you can join us, great. If you can't, sorry.
Is there, in addition to the scheduling, evaluation criteria or what's the process in terms of our initial interviews? Because I would imagine if you're also going to have different groups of people interviewing them, that we need at least a consistent core of individuals so that the comparison of performance can be similar. So I'm just kind of curious about what guidance we're getting from the HR. Do we need to have also a meeting with them so that all of us who are interviewing understand the rules and regulations in which we're participating in this process? So I'm just kind of...
We have not set up a criteria at this point. I would imagine that we'll have a set of questions that everyone will get asked. And we'll see how many of us go to all 3. We might get a good critical mass that come to all 3, which I think those should be the primary people asking the questions. Of course, if you can only come to 1, by all means come and listen in, but you won't really be able to make a discerning.
Yeah, and we have had candidate interviews for other jobs where we've done sort of a hybrid, where some interviewers are in the room and others can participate via, a computer set up with Zoom. I would push for that because I do think, personally, I get a lot more out of being in the room with someone, and, I think you just get a sense for the person better.
I think we can probably set that up, looking at Sean. Yeah, okay.
But are you planning on this isn't the final round though, right? This is just the first interview.
Well, there's 3,
There's
and
3 interviews.
so we'll see. I mean, if there's a clear front runner from all of the people who interview it, then it might be the final round. If there isn't, then we would narrow it down to 2, I guess, and then.
Bring that. Definitely.
Are there time constraints that require you to pick one of the 3, or could you interview them and say, we don't like any of the 3, and we're gonna go back and
No,
fish?
absolutely.
Okay.
The only time constraint is what
Yeah.
we just heard. I mean,
Okay.
right, this situation is not tenable
Right.
for a long time. So we need to move.
Yep. Sounds right. All right, anything else on that front?
Nope, that is all I have to report.
All right, great. Facilities and Contract Subcommittee.
Yeah, so the Facilities and Contracts Committee has not met after our first meeting. We're still in the information gathering stage. I think you heard Ms. DiMatteo say that they're pulling together contracts. We'll be looking at those when we get them. And folks who are on that subcommittee will be hearing from me soon.
Just on that front, I think that my office has pulled all the contracts that we have on our files. Most of them are typically going to be more than $25,000 that were approved by council. we provided those to the solicitor's office.
We've gotten some. I think those might be the ones you're talking about.
All right, the next item, I'm not sure if we actually had anything for today on the budget preparation. I don't see Howard here, so.
I just had a meeting with him and he did say, I'm going to need some guidance on what to put in the budget for next year from this committee. So that is something we do need to hammer it down, but.
Yeah, which is another reason to have a director. I'm sure that person's going to want to
Exactly.
have some say in what their budget looks like for next year. All right, the next item is a discussion of presentations offered for future meetings. So one thing that we have discussed is that having kind of a steady invitation of folks who have relevant experience to this board's mission to come in and to present to us. And I think we've had a few people who we've talked about being good candidates for such presentations. We didn't really have anyone on the calendar for today, but offline we will circulate a few folks who've been discussed. And certainly an invitation to all board members if you think there's someone else who would be a good candidate for presentation to us.
Do we have some names to share today, or?
Well, we do. So
I've submitted
can't-
some names
right.
and provided some connection via email to make it a little bit easier. So I know the IU is one.
Right.
Okay.
And I know that I spoke with the IU.
Okay.
And they said that they can't come to next month's meeting, but they would
Okay.
like to come to our November meeting and
Great.
present kind of what they were doing in the process and kind of how they see that could be improved upon and going forward.
Great.
So.
And if folks want to throw out other suggestions, we're happy to entertain them. We'll follow up and reach out to folks.
Okay, good. I'm thinking about that.
Okay.
Great. Any other new business?
Yeah, I'd like to just get the board to allow us to talk about getting into the building and inventorying and preserving the records that are there. From our last tour of the building, people had been through it for, I guess, official purposes, but it was really kind of left as is with Park Police patrolling. But I think even in looking for contracts, there's some administrative offices, there's filing cabinets, and I have people in my office that are routinely, we are responsible for retention of certain records, and I really think we need to be on that. So I'd like to be able to talk, and I did talk to council a little bit about this ahead of time, just because it seems like it's time for us to do that. So in some way, I'd like to be able to get the board to approve talking with council about getting the right group out there to, I think there's two sensitive areas, at least there's business records, and I think there's also possibly medical records. So we need confidentiality, and the people in my office are under confidentiality agreements already. And also, but we may perhaps use a paralegal or some other resources, but we really need to get in there and get them squared away.
Yeah, agreed. Has there been any, do we need to clear that with the Attorney General's office as to what can and can't be?
I don't know. That
Okay, I feel you're speaking from the background. Shelley Smith, counsel for the board. We will, with your authorization, we will reach out to the Attorney General's office to determine what our ability is to go in and secure those documents.
Okay.
And then we can make paralegal available to assist with that process if necessary, if required,
Great.
deemed desired.
And Ms. Smith, do you suggest that we have formal action by the board for that, or can we kind of?
I don't know that we need formal action by the board. I think that
Just a general
the
consensus that we're
general
supportive?
consensus of the board is that this process ought to go forward. I think that should be sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, that seems pretty
because
non-controversial.
part of my reason for that is that I think when we all went through the building, I mean, at some point, we need more than Park Police to walk around that building. And
Yeah.
for facility, we don't want to waste an asset that we have in some way because we need workers or something in there. And right now, with the condition it's in with records, that really doesn't seem appropriate. So I'd like to really take the lead or with council to get that at least cleaned up and records retained so that we know we just have them somewhere.
And I'm assuming too, and I'm sure Ms. Smith, you can assist us, there's providers that were in there providing mental health and medical services, educational services, and those records ultimately would, to go back to them. So for instance, there's a mental health provider that was providing services. So if any of them belong to the clinician or to the medical professional.
Right, we would certainly need to ascertain exactly what
Sure.
records are in the facility and where they belong. Some of them may be the county's because the county runs the facility. Some of them may properly go back to the provider that was providing services. So we need to get in there and see what's there and figure that out. Yeah. And what the contract provides with respect to custody of that.
Sure.
I have to say that I don't have unlimited resources in my office. I have a guy that I think I can send with the paralegal. I have a few people that are used to retaining records. We take care of all the original records. So
if Archer can provide some
I
assistance
think we can
there.
help, and then we can ascertain whether more time's needed or something, or if we need to get some help. But I've got people that are used to doing that and taking it to the archives or whatever. So, but we can just leave them there depending on discussion with council.
Okay, great.
I have another issue I'd like to bring up. As I think most people know, our head of human resources, Jim Kane, has resigned. And I think this is his last week, or maybe it's next week. And he is it next week?
Next week.
And he was really our main point of communication with the former employees. And I want to make sure that that doesn't get dropped. So I'm wondering if there's anybody here that kind of wants to be the gadfly and bird dog that and make sure that we continue to communicate.
I
But
think
it would mean working with our human resources.
Yeah, I think it should probably be one of us, one of the council members or the controller. So, yeah, let's make sure that.
So you're
Sure.
volunteering?
Got I volunteer myself. Yeah, we'll make sure.
Been any progress since
There have been 2 communications to the workforce. Most recently, I think, was 2 weeks ago. That I know. There may have been yet another. But they have been notified that positions around the county that are available to them, they're being open to them.
That's it. That's all I have.
Okay. Any other new business? All right. Last round of public comment. Anyone from the public wish to speak?
Yes, please. Hi, my name's Alyssa Poole. I'm from the Public Defender's Office. I'm the new chief of the juvenile unit. I think I had addressed some of you over a Zoom session a couple weeks ago. It was my understanding that Ms. DiMatteo was perhaps going to get into some more information today regarding non-carceral options, but I did want to address some of the things she brought up today with respect to this past weekend. My office is oftentimes left with many questions regarding why the juvenile is being detained and why the particular facility is being picked for their detention. Before coming here today, I actually took the time to call all of the local detention centers that we're using to get some additional information. Montgomery County has 36 beds, but apparently we're only contracted for 2 of those beds. I'm not sure.
That's all they'll permit us to have.
That is the only detention center that told me that there was a limit on how many beds we could have. I also spoke with Bucks County. They also have 36 beds. Currently, we have 3 juveniles that are there. Aspire, which is the furthest away at 5 hours, has only 12 beds total. 3 of our kids are currently there. 1 of them was transported there on Friday. However, I never received any information. There was no email circulated letting me know that he had been detained or he was being sent there. And that happened during business hours on Friday. So it was particularly upsetting to then see on the news what had occurred and then find out that that's where he was.
If he has private counsel, are they still supposed to notify you?
He does not have private counsel. The one that was sent to Aspire actually is our client. And normally I am notified of any juveniles that are detained because it's not a privacy issue at that point in time. And my office is presumed as representation until private counsel enters. Chester County Youth Center, we have not been using them as of late, although when I did speak with the woman today, They have the largest number of beds that is close to us. They have 60, but 12 are designated for shelter care. So 48 beds. The big problem they're having is staffing. But currently we have no kids there. I would like to implore the board to help us have more transparency, oversight, accountability, and neutrality with what's happening with our kids. I spend a lot of my time asking questions, asking people, how was this determination come to? Did you contact these other facilities? There's never any kind of documentation provided to me saying, this kid came in at this time, we called these facilities, they didn't have any beds, that's why we made the choice to go here. There is very limited paper that we get, but that information is never contained in that. Additionally, in my office's opinion, the menu of services at this point in time for our kids are either detention or GPS, and GPS is not a service. I know YAP did approach the board. I would encourage the board to follow up with YAP again. That is a service that could address the strengths and needs of our kids and will also help have less kids need to be detained or sent to a placement. I would encourage the board to speak to YAP and the conversations they've had with probation since the last time they did present to the board. It's troubling to me because it does seem that probation is trying to push a particular agenda of what they think is needed as opposed to what the board thinks is needed. And obviously you're a neutral party that can weigh in that capacity. One of our kids that is currently in detention at Bucks County, he was actually accepted to a placement that I've been advocating for him to go to. However, Juvenile Services is telling us that there's not a valid contract. Spent a lot of time, dug through that. There is a valid contract, they're just waiting for the signed paperwork to come back. And Francine Slavic is actually the document director from ARC. I can give contact information, she'd be happy to speak with the board. She's frustrated on her end because she emailed all the signed paperwork on August 24th and also mailed it. As of September 10th, I was told once they received back the paperwork, they would mail out the new contract that had already been approved by County Council per the director. She still has not received the new contract as of today. She wasn't even contacted or followed up on until September 13th when she sent out the paperwork on the 24th of August to tell her she didn't sign Appendix L so that we couldn't send out the new contract. Upon receiving that, she immediately signed it, sent it out, and we're still now at the 21st and she still has not received the new contract. It's discouraging for my office because we don't understand what placements are being sought, how they're being vetted, and why all of the control seems to be in probation's hands when obviously they have a stake, because if they don't agree with the placement, which they don't in this particular case, they're almost taking away an option for one of our kids. And that's why that one juvenile is still taking up a bed in our detention center. So I just wanted to address some of these concerns. Again, I think it's important for our kids to have as many options as possible. And I do think that the fact that Lima has shut has caused us to have to look at other options besides just going to the gut reaction of detaining. And in particular, those two kids that Ms. DiMatteo did reference, the one had a right to detain hearing on Monday. Everything was kept in place. There's been no issues with the GPS. The other one is scheduled for a right to detain on Wednesday, and there have been no issues with that juvenile either. So although that might not have been their first choice, those juveniles are both doing fine in the community. There's been no issues. Again, showing that we don't necessarily need to default automatically to detaining everyone.
Can I ask you, in a perfect world where we had a juvenile detention center, you know, whatever it ends up looking like, with a director, would the communication about these placements come from that? Would that he or she be involved, or is it always at the probation?
So my understanding at this point in time is that probation is making the determination to detain and where they're being sent to. We are not being informed of how that determination is being made. We're not being told who has been reached out to. So I guess in a perfect world, we would know where they're being detained, but we should still be given the basis for why they're being detained, which I believe is why Delaware County is now moving towards the Padre evaluation. It has not been implemented yet, but I believe they are training on it next month, and then that will give us a breakdown of why a juvenile was detained. But at this point in time, there's no evaluation, there's no assessment, there's nothing tangible we can be given to justify why detention was chosen.
So,
I haven't heard you mention anything about what the court's
Yes.
position is in this. Have you addressed any of these issues to the juvenile court judge?
So
And if
I-
you have, what has been the result?
So I have, with respect to the particular individual I'm talking about that I would like to be placed at ARC,
Now, I'm talking about generally, yeah, that one individual, but I'm talking about generally some of these concerns that you're having about where the juveniles are, whether it's pre-trial or post-adjudication or pre-adjudication. Have you addressed that, or do you see that as something that the court doesn't have any authority to address?
I'm not sure that the court fully, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I feel like the court was guided a lot by probation when the new judge took over and thought, and my office was not as active back then, so he didn't realize that there were additional alternatives that could be proposed. Because at the end of the day, it should be the judge's determination where the juvenile gets placed and whether or not the juvenile remains in detention. And we have been pushing and arguing for that. But the judge is not consulted after the initial incident and the detention. We don't get in front of a judge or a hearing officer until usually 2 days later, depending on if it happens over the weekend or even if it's during the week, how quickly the paperwork can be generated and circulated to everyone.
So these issues you've just described have not been raised specifically to the judge?
I mean, they have. I wouldn't say that we sat down and just had a full-on meeting such in a fashion as this.
Understood.
Ms. Poole, just for some clarification for myself, petitions filed, what I'm hearing you say is that you're not involved in understanding the determination of placement at that time and the why a certain placement is being chosen. Is that correct?
The detention, correct.
Detention, correct.
Yes.
Okay. And so obviously your office is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for these discussions when it happens in an emergency situation, which it certainly does.
So emails get sent out. I do have all of my emails come directly to my phone, and I do always check them. So if someone needed to reach out to me and speak to me, I would be happy to give them my number to add on to that list. That has not happened. All I do is get an email after the fact.
After the fact. So it sounds like if it would either be you or a liaison having this open dialogue.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
In reference to Chester County, I know they have turned us down numerous times or have called and said, we no longer can take this juvenile because he's too violent or too much of a problem here. So maybe that's one of the reasons why they don't go to Chester County, or Chester County doesn't always accept our kids.
I can't speak for why they don't accept all of our kids. I know that they've had some staffing issues, is what I was told by the woman today. However, they have indicated that they are available and could take our kids, and in fact, could take a kid even as of today.
Yeah, I know I think 2 months ago, they called us and said, you have to get these 2 kids out of here. We no longer can handle them. So that could be an issue also.
I also just had I'm sorry, go ahead.
My question was more in line with Candace's question. I'm having a hard time understanding what has broken down in terms of the communication, because the way you presented it seems like there was an expectation that some communication happened at the point of the arrest or at the point of the event. So if you could just articulate, based on your call for increased transparency, what actually is your recommendation on the specific request related to this? Because
My specific request would be for them to provide why a particular detention facility was chosen, what steps were taken to determine that that was the appropriate facility. For example, Aspire, as I've indicated before, is 5 hours away. That makes it very difficult for us to speak with our clients, for them to speak with their families when they're at such a great distance. If the decision is made to place them at Aspire, I would like to be provided with information that they reached out to Montgomery County. They said no beds were available. They reached out to Chester County. No beds were available, to show that the steps were taken to try and use a local placement before going to a placement that's so far away. I'd also like to know, are we detaining the child solely on the basis of the charges? There's a lot of factors that go into whether or not a child should be detained. If this is a child's first petition and they have family support, just because it looks like a scary offense does not necessarily mean they should be detained. And in many instances, it seems like the charge is the sole reason why they are detaining that child.
But that decision is made by the juvenile probation officer, is it not?
It is, but there's
And so
no,
if it's made by the juvenile probation officer and you disagree with it, isn't it appropriate to take that to the court?
which we do address the right to detain, Your Honor.
Yes, right.
But we're not given that information in the first place. So I can't go in and effectively argue they detained him solely on the basis of this offense, I'm guessing what the reason was because I'm not being provided it.
Okay. Was this the procedure pre-closing of the detention center? Was this the procedure that they had before?
I can only speak to since I took over, Your Honor, and I took over last September in this role. I was not with the office prior to that. I will tell you, since I've taken over, we've been given more information. So I don't know what the procedure was before. I would think that there was less communication because, like I've said, since I've taken over, we've gotten more communication, but it's still not at the point where it should be, in my opinion.
And Ms. Poole, what's your staff saying that's been with the office for years? What is their experience like with this situation? And I'd imagine it's more challenging since the detention center closed, but you do have staff that's been there for years.
We do have staff. I will be frank, a lot of the staff that had been in my unit are no longer with the office, so I did not have an opportunity to get additional information from them.
So my takeaway then is ultimately the decision for detention lies with the courts. But
The initial detention lies with probation.
Right.
probation.
Yep.
But once we get into the realm of there being a decision to detain, what you're asking for is more transparency about how the decision as to where that juvenile is headed for detention, that there's greater transparency around that.
Why they were detained and why the detention facility was chosen. In addition to then.
But I guess that's a two-part question. The first about why they're detained.
Right.
That's not really one for this board to answer. It's more for parole, for probation to determine, right?
That is one more for probation to determine. I'm just talking about, that's another example of the transparency that is needed so that we can all work towards the same goal, which is obviously looking out for our kids, helping to rehabilitate our kids.
Yes, absolutely. And look, I think, this is a fairly new board. We only have our own council as of last month. One of the key things for this board to really understand is what exactly can be done in terms of the management of those contracts and the decision-making around where a juvenile goes.
Okay.
Just one more. Have you requested to meet with juvenile probation in reference to this?
I have.
And they said, what was their answer?
I have met with juvenile probation a number of times, working towards having better transparency.
And I just had a question too. It was my understanding that that it was presented to us that the standard was that they went from closest to and called the closest, if there were beds available, facility, and then moved their way down to the farthest away. And so are you saying that there's no documentation, and you would like to have documentation that they've actually called that and checked it off and that there were no beds available at those locations?
That's correct. There have been a couple of times where kids have been detained. There seemed to be a period of time where all of our kids were automatically going to Aspire, and my office did take the time to reach out to the other facilities that were closer to say, did anyone reach out to see if a bed was available? And the responses we got were not consistent with the child then being sent to Aspire. So that's why I was asking for that additional information.
I was just wondering what capacity, and when you're calling other facilities, you're not doing it through other public defender offices, you're just calling on behalf of your office to the facilities. I mean, I have some concern about miscommunication between different agencies within the county that are trying to make arrangements. So I'm just wondering in what capacity that's being done. Because are these your clients at that point, or is it sort of you're worried as an umbrella as a whole before they are a client?
It's presumed that all kids are a public defender's client until a private attorney enters. So when I am notified that a juvenile has been detained, it's presumed that they're my client until I'm told otherwise. I reach out to the detention center myself. I identify myself in my capacity, and then I have asked questions. I have not reached out to other public defenders' offices to ask about detention availability. I've called the facilities directly.
Have you had the conversation with Ms. DiMatteo before that?
I have had conversations with Ms. DiMatteo before that regarding why certain juveniles are being detained and what the status has been, and can you tell me who was reached out to?
Okay.
Well, this is obviously a task that requires ongoing day-to-day management, and I think that only highlights why there is urgency for this board to hire someone to do so, because absent it, we don't really have someone who's making these calls day in and day out. It's defaulting to Ms. DiMatteo.
I think it's their job, though. I think it's their job,
Yeah,
and
it's
then it's the
probation.
courts. I mean, I think it's their job.
Well,
I guess we'll see.
I'm on another page.
Yes, Sean.
Just listening to you and knowing what this board's job is and knowing what you have to do, I think that it would be good to hear from your office about where we need to go globally, looking at the big picture. And that obviously your office has a lot more contact with juveniles than anybody else here. And so I think I'd like to hear from you in terms of what you think could make things better in Delaware County for juveniles. But at the same time, keeping in mind that we have to worry about the district attorney's office, public safety, the employees. I mean, it's a much bigger picture. But I think I would like to hear, at least speaking only for myself, what do you think? What would it look like if we had it better at the end of this journey, so to speak, okay?
Absolutely. I would welcome the opportunity to think about that and come back and address after I've had time to fully discuss it and vet it with the rest of my staff so that we can give a well thought out.
Okay, I'm speaking only for myself. I'm not speaking for the board, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Poole.
I'd just like to say a few words. So my name is Olivia Rosenberger. I'm actually the Chief of Social Services for the Juvenile Unit at the Public Defender's Office. So Alyssa and I work hand in hand. So I'm in the field day to day with our youth. And I just wanted to comment on some of the things that Alyssa said regarding community-based services. As she mentioned, we do have some GPS community-based services in the county. However, there is so much need. Day to day, I'm having to help kids enroll in school. I'm having to help kids get their birth certificates and their photo IDs because they can't get into school as a result of that. They can't get jobs because they don't have those things. That costs money for them to get. That also requires a guardian to be supportive and be able to help them through that. And in many cases, that doesn't happen. So day to day, I found myself having to focus, and put a lot of time just into one client. And so I think, as Alyssa mentioned, the program YAP could be very beneficial because we need more help. And we need to be able to focus more time on helping the kids in the community so that they can have success there. When you just get home and you're from placement and you're just sitting there because you haven't been enrolled in school yet and you're not involved in other activities and you can't find a job because you don't have your identifying information that you need to get the job, then that's just time that you're sitting around and more time to get in trouble, more time to be frustrated because you're not able to reach your potential because you're not getting that help. So I think that would be where the focus should lie and where the help is really needed, because we could really be preventing a lot of these situations by just providing that help.
Can I ask you a question? Can you repeat your name for me?
Sure, Olivia Rosenberger.
That's what I thought I had, okay. And you are one person in the social services, or do you have a team?
So I am the only social services advocate for our juvenile unit.
Okay. That's a lot.
So we're hoping to have another one. But again, it comes down to, at the end of the day, myself, the juvenile probation officer, and the community-based worker having to work together. And even then we still struggle because there's just so much support that needs to be given to our youth. And we need more help and we need to try new things.
So I heard a strength there, that you are collaborating yourself. You're collaborating with juvenile probation for services for a
Right.
child.
Some probation officers are very willing to collaborate, while others are not.
And do you do home visits?
So depending upon the client, I can, yes.
And I don't know if you can answer this or if this is more appropriate for Ms. Poole, but when I heard about the one child that you said was on GPS and doing well, no problems in the community, how do you determine that? Are you going to the home? Are you speaking? I heard there was family concerns, so I was just curious.
Sure. So first, I have to be made aware of the case specifically. But Again, it's for me, it's case by case right now because I am triaging cases because it's solely myself. But I do go visit the kids wherever they're staying. I call them. I have a work cell, so sometimes the kids prefer text message. So I'll do that. I also will go with them. Like, I'm not allowed to transport them, but I can coordinate with their community-based worker. For example, I went with a client to Community Action Agency to help her do a housing assessment. I've gone with a client to help them go get their ID or to open a bank account, and learn how to have a debit card and how to do those things. But again, it's time-consuming work, but that is where I think it would be more beneficial for us to put that time in. Go ahead.
So I too heard a strength, which is that there's a team-based approach to support young people. Can you talk a little bit about how your functions or your role on this team overlap with the community-based worker?
So again, as I mentioned, they can overlap. However, there are, right, so there's a brochure of services that you might get from a community-based program or whatever, right? And there's a whole list of things that they can help a client with. Now, are those things actually happening? Not always, because caseloads are so high. So you're not always able to provide the level of care that you want to the youth. I know some of the community-based services, for example, George Jr., they maintain lower caseloads for that reason, so that they can ensure that they're not overwhelming their caseworkers, and those caseworkers are able to have extra help. And then there's other programs that have very, very high caseloads. And so the face-to-face time that those workers are having with our youth are very limited.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Hello, board. My name is Chris Thomas, Morton, PA. Thank you, ladies, for your comment. Olivia, Chris says hello. I have a question to ask everyone as a whole. Can anyone in this room right now honestly say that they feel comfortable knowing that you can have two people that attempted an armed robbery walking around with a monitor in our community?
Yeah, repeat what you just said.
Anyone in this room comfortable with the fact that we have juveniles walking around currently in our community with a monitor on after attempting an armed robbery?
Have they been charged with armed robbery? Have they been charged with armed robbery?
They're awaiting their hearings.
Yeah,
What
I'm
type
not
of
happy
hearing?
about that.
Isn't there a presumption of innocence?
There's always a presumption there is, yes.
Okay, all right, so I'm comfortable with that then.
Okay.
Well, and I'd like to clarify, I don't believe they're walking around, they're on a monitor and in their homes.
A monitor, I mean, you're absolutely right, but a monitor is just an anklet, right?
And if you leave your home.
And you can violate, but in the process of violating, you're in the community. And if you're already the type that presumably engages in this type of activities.
Sir, I'll take your question as a rhetorical one. I think you're saying that you're not comfortable, and
Sure.
This is an opportunity for public comment. It's
Okay,
not one for
moving on.
a debate of.
One last question I have. Is there any particular reason that there's only one person that was named in the initial affidavit of wrongdoing with the detention center that was allowed to continue to work since March?
I can't speak to that.
My understanding is no one's been working.
Ms. DiMatteo's name was on that affidavit. Thank you for your time.
Any other public comment? All right, any further comments from board members? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Take the second, Dr. Taylor. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You guys have it. Thank you all.